to bioterrorism. We usually don't have antivirals or treatment ready to go because a lot of times we don't even know what it is. It takes a while until we figure out what it is that we're actually working with the agent.
Let's say you have a terrorist cell. You have an engineered virus that just has to get airborne. A biological released into the air on another human being in a high-density populated area like Los Angeles or New York, you're going to infect everybody. I mean, you're going to achieve your end. With the amount of travel that Americans do, with the amount of border crossing that the Europeans do, we can easily perpetuate a strain globally within weeks.
For doctors, it will be like getting hit with the tsunami of the sick and dying. Around the world, hospitals will be ground zero.
We don't have the resources currently, or the facilities currently, to handle what might be the influx of sick patients into hospitals, ERs, communities.
Every ER is full. Every hospital bed is full. Every nurse is maxed to their limits. Every doctor, ER physician is maxed to their limits. If that's the case, how are you going to take 10 more patients, 20 more patients, 50 more patients? We're not. It's not going to happen. There's no way the system can withstand that.
Even worse, the virus could quickly split into several subtypes, each resistant to different drugs.
Viruses mutate a lot quicker than bacteria. It just takes that one virus to actually mutate and form that right combination that nobody would survive.
If a virus is mutating so much and is bouncing from host to host to host and creating different strains within each host, it becomes almost incompatible. So no matter how big our military is, no matter how much we try to contain, no matter how much we try to shut down our airports to keep this spread from happening, it is very unlikely that we could.
Apocalyptic extremes emerge. Quarantine, mass panic, and finally, the breakdown of society.
If the illness or mutation is severe enough, the number of casualty will be too much to handle. We wouldn't know where to put the bodies.
There would be bodies not being collected, power outages, medical services being overwhelmed.
When we're talking about the right mutation, the number of dead would be so great that we would have dead people on the streets.
You have mass death and no antibiotic to cure it because they were laboratory designed, genetically engineered plagues. And I think that's what the book of Revelation refers to. I don't think God is sending down sickness on planet Earth. I think it's more of a matter of he's saying, okay, you wanted to design diseases, I'll let you do that. But then you're going to have to deal with the consequences.
Biblical prophecy of a worldwide plague that would kill half the population is on a whole different scale again. And if it comes from heaven or if it's allowed by God, it's going to be horrible.
And both science and religion agree, it may only be a matter of time. The next sign involves a different type of disaster, one that strikes the very ground we walk on. A massive global earthquake, unlike anything seen in human history. Many are skeptical of the Bible's 7 signs. They simply cannot believe a loving God unleashing such a holocaust on humanity. But as the investigation of the 7 signs prophecy continues, a pattern begins to emerge. It's a dark place on the fringes of human knowledge, a place where the differences between modern science and ancient prophecy begin to blur. The next sign brings that dark place into sharper focus, revealing a new level of horror and destruction. Within the last decade alone, the world has been struck by a series of catastrophic earthquakes.
The 2004 Sumatra earthquake, the tsunami from that event killed at least 270,000 people. We just had an earthquake in China. The estimates are 80,000 people killed. In 2005, there was an earthquake in Pakistan. Again, probably killed 80,000 people.
Hundreds of thousands of victims suffer. Women, children, the young and old. Are these terrible disasters linked to ancient biblical prophecy? For believers in the seven signs, the evidence is clear.
And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake.
Some believe the worst is yet to come.
This is unlike anything we've ever seen in human history. This is a massive global earthquake that will terrify people to the core of their being.
Imagine killer earthquakes striking all over the world at the same time. Even scientists are terrified by the possibilities.
We're planning for ourselves here in the US, but if you think about some of the other places like Bangladesh, in Dhaka, an earthquake there, oh my goodness, the numbers will be staggering.
For many devout Christians, it's a glimpse into the destruction foretold by the seven signs.
One more evidence that God is trying to literally shake the human race awake to their need for Him.
Earthquakes play a central role in the prophecy, one that goes beyond breaking the sixth seal.
Earthquakes are a key judgment of God throughout the book of Revelation in what's called the seventh bowl. It talks about an earthquake occurring that is so great that the world has never seen it before. Mountains are leveled all across planet Earth. Islands dissipate and disappear. Entire cities are leveled.
For believers, a quake this gigantic and destructive would have to be an act of God.
The judgments in the book of Revelation, that many of them will be intensification of natural phenomena that we see today. I'm not sure you can take a look at the natural world today and say, well, that's what it is and that's what it's going to be. It is literally a supernatural event.
Earthquakes have a long history that predates the Bible. One of the leading scientists on the subject is Thomas Jordan, director of the Southern California Earthquake Center.
Earthquakes are among the largest killers of human beings in terms of natural disasters. We know of at least 21 earthquakes that have killed more than 50,000 people in recorded history.
Earthquakes strike along fault lines, places where the gigantic plates that make up the Earth's crust collide. With each plate weighing trillions of tons, the amount of energy unleashed by a major quake is enormous. In fact, the island of Patmos, where the book of Revelation was written, lies in an area that's noted for its violent seismic activity. It's even probable that John of Patmos himself experienced the terror of earthquakes firsthand. The same is true for his earliest readers, the Christians living in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. To them, the symbolism of earthquakes was clear. They were the judgment of a wrathful God.
We know when you get to the very end of the bowl judgments with the great earthquake, that there's great fear and an understanding that they're facing the wrath of God. God is unhappy.
Today, experts are trying to gain a more scientific insight into these calamities. In California, geologists drilled deep to place sensitive instruments directly into one of the world's most dangerous earthquake faults, the San Andreas.
At this point, the earthquake science community is faced with a situation which we don't really have the ability to predict earthquakes.
This is the first time anyone has drilled into an active plate fault. By setting up a monitoring station directly in the fault zone, seismologists hope to learn whether or not earthquake prediction is possible. Yet to scientists, one thing is very clear.
We know those events are going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
True believers in the seven signs see a far more powerful force being unleashed.
I'm not sure if those scientific explanations are necessary. If God just decides to cause an earthquake, He can just make that happen.
We now know what causes earthquakes, and we know that they will continue to occur. What would have to happen today for an earthquake to be seen as a sign from God? To fulfill that prophecy, it would have to be a massive series of global quakes, striking cities along every fault line. San Francisco, Tokyo, Shanghai, Athens, Istanbul. The list would include cities in the US, especially those near the San Andreas Fault.
It runs from the southern end of the state all the way through the urbanized regions of Los Angeles and up through San Francisco into Northern California.
Alina Dorian has spent much of her career planning for that dark day.
The worst time for an earthquake to hit would be when you have the most population out in places where it's the highest risk, which means in high-rise buildings, roadways, having the kids in school so they're all separated from their families.
It would be a tremendously violent event. The ground could move by 10, 20 feet. It would be shaking strong enough that people would be literally thrown to the ground. They couldn't stand. And if you were next to tall buildings, windows falling out of tall buildings would be a tremendous hazard.
Anything that falls from a significant height is basically just like a stray bullet. Now add to that glass, which is in those large structures tempered and made to withstand significant wind. It's basically falling blades. So the amount of trauma that those things would cause would be enormous.
Many of the older brick buildings would collapse. The older concrete frame buildings would collapse outright. You'd see some floor slabs that were just pancakes with people stuck in between them.
You're going to get amputations, pneumothorax, which are collapsed lungs, crushed hearts. If you're bleeding out and you can't get to the hospital, you will die.
Even people in LA's modern steel frame skyscrapers, the kind that are designed to withstand large quakes, aren't totally safe.
At the very least, the building would begin to sway. For such a large earthquake, we'd anticipate that we'd see collapses of some of those buildings as well.
In a few minutes, the shaking will be over. But for those who survive the initial blow, the horror is just beginning. Fires caused by broken gas lines and fallen high voltage wires will spread throughout the city.
If you start enough fires simultaneously, you'll overwhelm the resources to put it out, and instead of slowly putting the fire out, the fire will start to grow. And of course, if fires get large enough, and they just keep growing, that's what we call a conflagration.
With water mains and roadways severed, a post-quake firestorm in LA could last for days, even weeks. Thousands of people trapped in collapsed buildings or too badly injured to move will be incinerated. Eventually, even a fire this size will burn itself out, but the community will continue to suffer.
It's not just the deaths. Deaths are huge. But then you have 6 months, a year, 2 years of recovery time for everyone else. And not just people that are sick, but people that are displaced, people that don't have homes, they don't have jobs anymore, they don't have possessions, they don't, their families have been ripped apart. Imagine afterwards trying to get your life back together again as an individual, as a system, as a business. I mean, it has huge ramifications.
And this is just one city, in one country, in the entire world. Imagine the consequences of a simultaneous global quake in poorer areas around the globe.
Those buildings can't survive. Those people have nowhere to go, and they are packed. There's so many people in a little square meter. So it's something that you have to think about.
Catastrophe on a biblical scale.
Earthquakes are a warning. They have taken place throughout human history, and they are an indication that God is still in control of Earth.
The next sign centers on a disaster that's less familiar, but could be even more catastrophic. Death from above, caused by one of the most powerful forces in the universe.